1, 2, 3, clap. 1, 2, 3, clap. Now you go.
1, 2, 3, clap. 1, 2, 3, clap.
Okay. Welcome to the first episode of the And Ayoub podcast. Now you go.
Great intro. This is exciting. I have no idea if anyone will ever see this. I don't really think it matters, but it would be interesting to see what at least like close friends and family think about whatever ramblings we're going to have.
You intend to share this with people that you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm curious. Like I told when I did your podcast and I was a guest, right? I told like lots of my friends about like, oh, hey, I was on this podcast. I'm very curious to, hear what you think. Because I thought that if nothing else, the content was interesting. Yeah. You guys have definitely been doing it long enough that I thought that it seemed pretty professional. It was good flow. Like it seemed very well done. The questions were interesting. The conversation flowed well. So it seemed like perfectly reasonable. They're just like interesting insights into our family that I wanted other friends of mine to be aware of. And that was a good as any forum to reveal that stuff.
I think this is a fine time to provide some backstory for whoever may be watching and or listening. And just to start off, to say that we are attempting to record this video format that will get on YouTube. Don't know. But in either case, you may be watching, and if you are, you're kind of a creep. And if you're listening, then that's fine. That's more normal to me. We are both named Ayoub, and so the name of the show is And Ayoub. And if you don't get the joke, then I'm sorry. I won't explain it. So the backstory here is that we are half brothers. We share the same father, and for nearly 30 years or so, we have not spoken. And recently, like how far back now? It's more than 6 months. It's like
last November.
So nearly a year ago, Phil reached out to me via email for the first time since we were estranged initially. And we've been talking ever since. And now we're attempting to do some form of podcast. So that's basically the gist of the backstory.
Yeah. We both, either by nurture or more likely nature, like to hear the sound of our own voices. So we thought, fuck it.
I mean, you can hear how good they are. So why wouldn't you?
Of course. The sweet dulcet tones. All right.
So for our first episode, we decided to be completely unprepared. But by coincidence, we assigned each other a book report.
It really was coincidence, too. Like, it wasn't.
No.
We're just interested in figuring out kind of like the limits of what we each like and what the overlap is of that. Like if we're into the same kinds of stuff, possibly.
So as a consequence of this, I made Phil buy and begin reading a book. Show the book, Phil. It's a Carl Jung book. He's a psychiatrist from many moons ago, and he said I should read a comic book.
I'm gonna do that thing that I hate to see done, but it has to be done.
Go ahead.
Calling it a comic book.
I know, it's worse. It's the bad one.
Well, it's not the bad one. It's just it's not accurate. I don't mind reading comic books. I'm not as interested in them as I am graphic novels, and the distinction is pedantic, and it immediately labels me a giant nerd for being fully aware of the distinction and correcting you on it.
That's fine.
The point is, what you're reading has a beginning, middle, and end. All right.
But so look, okay,
and it's a picture book.
Let's not mince words here. It's a comic book, and that's fine. It's a big comic book. It's lots of pages, but it is in fact a comic book. I had heard the term graphic novel many times over the years, and I did not know that a graphic novel was in effect a large comic book. I thought a graphic novel was
actually
a novel.
It's the opposite. A graphic novel is a short, because a comic book does it like Spider-Man is not. There's no end to Spider-Man.
Yeah, fair enough. But just to be sure, I thought a graphic novel was a novel that had some illustrations in it. I didn't realize that it was in fact the format of comic books. Let's put it that way. Yes, okay. So I have not begun this yet. It just arrived yesterday. The day before yesterday. Okay. So I have not had the opportunity to read it. Also, the text is very small and in funny fonts, so I'm going to have to get my glasses to go and attempt to read this. But I will.
Actually, one of the things that sets that particular graphic novel apart from others is the funny fonts. It was one of the first instances where you see the text bubbles try to reflect characterization in terms of speech. So like
the silly characters got Comic Sans,
kind of, and,
yeah. So this is gonna be a difficult read for me in an odd way.
Well, in more ways than one, not just because of the text, but also the panel format for a comic book, right? Attempts to have a logical procession from left to right, top to bottom, right?
You're telling me this one doesn't do that?
Well, it does and it doesn't. I mean, generally speaking, you're starting in the upper left and you're ending in the bottom right. And more often than not, there's a panel format on the page that you can readily follow. But the space in between the panels is known as negative space. And this comic did more with negative space than any comic previously.
Okay.
So sometimes you're reading a panel in front of the negative space first, and then sometimes you're reading the negative space first. It tries to be obvious, but every once in a while you might read a word bubble or a thought bubble or whatever.
That's fine.
Out of order.
That's fine. Well,
that's a thing that could happen.
Yeah, I'm not terribly worried about that. I'll make do. But it's interesting, actually, because if you think about what we've done here, is that these are two completely different books. Yes. Couldn't be more different from one another.
Well, actually...
Okay, let's just hold a second. They couldn't be any more different. You can argue that point in a moment.
Format.
And okay, fine. And I would agree. I would argue in content as also, but I haven't read it yet, so I can't say. The interesting part about it is as different as they are, they're going to be difficult reads for each other.
For very different reasons, though.
Yes, for very different reasons. Like we've assigned each other a task that neither of us would have embarked upon.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, all right, but you've already started reading your assignment.
Yeah, and as a show of good faith.
That's
true, because I don't.
Well, look at that
autobiographical material.
I pressed a flower at some point in this book.
What?
I have pressed a flower in this book. I opened the book. It's been a while since I've read the book. And apparently I had pressed a flower in the book.
In the book that you assigned to me that you own a copy of.
Yes, because I've read the book numerous times over the years.
Right. As opposed to the brand new graphic novel that you just received that also had a pressed flower in it, I thought a second ago, but doesn't.
No.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. That would have been fascinating.
I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
All right.
Like synchronicity or some shit.
Okay. So, yeah, for me, I don't really read autobiographical stuff or biographical stuff. It's not. It tends to be very dry. But the reason why, because you recommended this to me first, and the title of it, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, made me think of The Sandman. Anybody who knows The Sandman is going to understand that is where there is a similarity, a connection between these two works, is that they both deal in large part with the inner mind, the inner world. Obviously, yours is a fictional account, and this is a non-fictional account, but they deal with dreams and memories and reflections. And in fact, I think
hence the title. Now it's all coming together now.
See, there's a method to the madness.
Okay, carry on.
So I had, when I was reading this, particularly the first chapter, which is what I considered the introduction and the prologue. Yeah, the prologue. The introduction and the prologue to be like chapters, I guess. So I feel like I've read 3 chapters, even though it's
You're just making shit up now to sound like you're doing more than you are.
Well, here's the thing, right? I'll be honest with you. And this is gonna reveal how I feel about like books that are all just text to begin with.
You
just
mean books?
Just words with
You
no
mean
pictures?
books that are just words?
Just words. Yeah. What the fuck is this? So books that. So I don't know. I think that there is an arrogance. Or to me, it appears. Maybe I'm projecting.
Wait, you haven't even made it to first years yet?
No,
You're
I have.
only on page 5?
I've read through first years.
You've read through first years. Okay, yeah. Okay,
first years is done. Yeah. But to me, and maybe I'm projecting here, there is an arrogance to the preamble to a book, and it's like, just fucking get on with it. Just. Cause like the introduction is like, and Carl did blah blah. Let him fucking tell me. It's the goddamn autobiography, and then the prologue. Okay, so now I have substantive thoughts on first years.
Okay, but hold on a second before you carry on. When it comes to the introduction, right?
Yeah,
it's helpful to understand what this book is and how it arrived. And for anybody,
helpful
it is.
In what way?
No, because this is not a fictional novel. It's not a story time in that regard, and so it matters a little bit in the context of history, why and how this book even came to be, and the man why? Carl Jung, the man himself, an established and preeminent psychiatrist of early psychology who basically set the foundation for what we know today in psychiatry and psychology, had no intention of talking about himself. He didn't want to. People were asking him on a regular basis to write an autobiography, and he kept saying no, no, no over and over again.
And yet
he finally was convinced through the introduction and some other things to put together the book, which I believe...
Why should I care about the sausage that was made prior to this book's existence? Ultimately, however much arm twisting was done to get him to write this thing, he wrote it. So who gives a shit?
In the context where you will read this book and nothing else having to do with Carl Jung, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But if you have any interest whatsoever in how he arrived at the place that he is at the time that he wrote the book and how he developed his ideas over the years, it's a historical context that is interesting for the people who care to know that sort of information. Okay. But in your case, you read the introduction, and so, now you know it anyway, even though you might not want to.
Right. I mean, okay, so the prologue...
It's kind of like you telling me about the negative space between the panels in the book. What the fuck do I care? I'm just going to read the damn thing.
Well, that's to help you like, I don't need help reading this. I just need the willpower to get through chapters.
No,
like, there's nothing in this book that is so dense that I'm going to go, Jesus, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about.
Well, I don't know that that's true necessarily, but also the historical context of how the book came to be will help you understand the format of the book, because it's not a typical autobiography.
And that's and he goes into that in the prologue. Okay, so the prologue is really... I'm very critical of the prologue. First years, I have lots of substantive.
I like the fact that you're
non-critical comments.
Most critical of the thing that matters the least to you.
Well, sure, because I mean, let's put it this way: in terms of this book, I am a child. I don't have There's not a lot for me to talk about yet. So there's an intro, there's a prologue, and there's the first years.
So here we go. So criticize the prologue. Carry on.
So he makes it clear in the prologue that he's very interested, that the things that matter to him, particularly in his older age, are the inner life of things, the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions that go along with significant points in his life, memories, dreams, and the like. As opposed to the minutia of, I visited such and such place on such and such day, and we ate this lunch, and all that kind of shit.
Sure. The story that I have of the guy that I met at the place that we went to. Meaningless to him.
Right. And, I'm thinking about it now. Maybe it's because I haven't read a lot of biographies.
Okay.
But that seems to me as valid a telling of your life as any other content that a different author would have done for their own life that might have focused more on quote unquote superficial elements.
Yeah. So okay. So
to
I
me,
think
it's not any more or less common, and it's like, well, you're either disclaiming the content that you're gonna put in this thing and be like, hey, listen, warning, folks, this isn't like a, or you have an ego about it, or you're self-conscious about it, and it's like, why? Just fucking tell your story the way you want to tell it.
So,
why are you preparing me for the way in which you're gonna, like,
autobiographies, typically, as far as I've been aware, that I've read or that I've heard about, discuss life events in a chronological fashion, usually having to do with, you know, various historical moments, accomplishments, etc.
But surely even those more surface levels, say biographies, in order for them to have any kind of intrigue,
Yeah.
don't they at least touch upon the feelings and emotions that the author had at the time that he experienced those particular events? Isn't that what creates the connection with the reader?
I think what's necessary for you is to read the rest of the book such that you can understand more about the individual who wrote the prologue that you're criticizing. And you are maybe right in that it is a disclaimer and that he does have a bit of sort of self-consciousness about the content of his book, because in his view, he had no interest in explaining to people about his life. He just wanted to do the work. His interest was the work of exploring the inner mind, the ego, the superego, etc. And so that was his idea of what was important. It was never important to him to distribute his life story to anybody. And so when he was finally convinced to do so, the way in which he decided to approach it was sufficiently different than the way anybody else had ever approached it, but also fit precisely the kind of individual that he is or was, where his concern, like you said, was his internal monologue, his understanding of psychology, the way in which he experienced the world through his emotions and through his unconscious mind. And one of the things about Carl Jung, for anybody that knows anything about him, that's extraordinary, was his ability to explore the unconscious mind of himself on his own in a way that few others have ever really been able to do, and or for that matter, to articulate it in a way that is so relatable to other humans that it's no longer a song or a poem or a painting or something that is trying to express an inner emotion of the unconscious in a way that is abstract. Here, he explores those inner emotions, and he lays them out in a way that is so clear to understand that it's, to me, extraordinary.
Well, I think actually first years did a lot for me to set this, to understand how unique he is as a thinker, because
he was a child when he was saying those words.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, because I made little sticky remarks and various.
This is literally book club. Yeah.
Oh well.
I mean, hey, here we are. You wanted content, we got content.
There you go, folks.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, so one of the things that one of the reasons why the Sandman series resonates so much with me is because, to me, it does exactly what you just said. It puts forth, in this case, a visual representation of the amorphous nature of dreaming in such, at least for me, a precise way that it's like, yes, that's exactly what it looks like when you're dreaming. The elephant turns into a bridge. Yep. And then you walk across the sand dunes that were the bridge on the elephant's back on the clock tower. And it's like crazy shit like that. But represented visually, and you're like, that's that sort of fluid where symbols get interchanged with just ease.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I have a very strong memory of most of my dreams, particularly in childhood. And I'm certain it's like riding a bike. I have no doubt that if I wanted to, because usually when I wake up, I have perfect recollection. If I started like a dream journal or whatever, I imagine I could, with great detail in the first hour of waking, recall. And if I got into that habit, I'd be like right back when I was like a little kid again. And at this point, I have stored in long-term memory recurring dreams that happened to me at a younger age, and there is literally a dreamscape. There is a topography, there is a geography, there's a map in my head of the where and what of the vast majority of my dreams and their content. And I can even identify the real world places, people, and things that dreamscape draws from. And so one of the first things that struck me in reading Carl Jung's book in the first years, he talks about one of his earliest memories. Every once in a while you're going to see me do this. I'm referring to the book.
For the creeps out there, by the way,
yeah,
if there are any creeps watching,
I'm not just looking at my junk. It's just actually if I have to adjust myself. Yeah. I can move the book, and then the
book is wireless.
Look at that, folks.
By the way, if anybody was wondering, books are wireless, so you can take them wherever, and they work no matter where.
Yeah, go figure. So he talks about he's in a pram, I guess a stroller or whatever, and it's a warm summer day, and he's looking up at light streaming through trees. And that actually reminded me very much of one of the places that is a well-known spot, a well-known location in my dreamscape, is a grove of trees where I can recall myself looking up. Now, is it based on a memory? That I have no idea of. In his case, he's remembering this from when he was a little baby, like 2 or whatever, I don't know. And that's one of his earliest recollections. But the way he described it, it was very similar to mine, where there's this beautiful grove of trees, and I'm looking up through the leaves at the blue sky and the light coming through, and very, very similar, the emotional thing that he talks about, like how it gave him like this complete sense of like well-being, and it made him feel like wonderful and splendid and all that stuff. Like very much the same. Like I can't really control it, but on the nights when I visit that place in my dreaming, that is the sense that I have. It's just you can hear the light rustling of the wind and the trees, and it's really nice. So that was something where I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, there's like this like common sort of thing that I guess we shared. I
can't say that this is one of those things necessarily, but one of the things that Jung identifies and works on quite diligently over the years, partially in this book, but really in his other works. So if you want to go further into that world, is the concept of a collective consciousness and a fundamental biological similarity in all of us, such that certain imageries, certain ideas, certain concepts are ingrained within us, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. And he gives them names, and he talks about how they flow. There's a whole, he doesn't talk very much about it in this book, but in some of his other books, his study of primitive cultures.
That's the whole idea behind a Jungian archetype, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's the archetype. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, his idea to study primitive cultures was such that he figured, okay, well, let me go back and find the humans that are, in his view, the least civilized, right? Who are as close to our ancestors were thousands of years ago, who live today. Let me go spend time with them. And what he learned is that, the way that they do certain things is different. The way that they operate certain, bits of their society are different. But fundamentally, there are precise similarities that exist between, academia in Switzerland in the early 20th century, in late 19th century, and tribe in the Amazon jungle that hasn't had contact with anybody except for, a few people. outside of their civilization. And so those similarities bridge the gap of societal norms by themselves, on their own. And so those themes, that the idea that his view of looking through a grove of trees at the sun above made him feel at peace and calm and happy, and so it does for you, and quite possibly everybody else who might experience that image.
Right.
That is a shared experience.
Yeah, that's the common humanity that's like built into our DNA.
Basic.
That like,
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you're from. If you're chilling on a nice day, looking up at the sky,
it's nice.
Through the
Everybody
trees,
likes it.
Yeah.
It's basement level shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, even that, that's, I don't know if it's the thesis necessarily, but that certainly is the conclusion that he draws at the end of that chapter, First Years. He sort of relays other dreams and memories that he's had, and then says, like, in my later years when I was doing my research and then recounting how I was dreaming about stuff as a child, I came to realize, like, holy crap, this is a common thing. And I was never taught this. He's like, my dad never taught me about these images. I never read about these images in a book, but I had them in my dreaming and in my memories, and apparently other cultures do as well. So there must be some unifying theme to all this.
So one of the things that plagues me, and I'm sure lots of other people, is this idea that did I think of that, or did I see that somewhere and I'm not sure about how it came to be, right? Like, was this an original idea that I had, a thought, an image, or did I see it in a TV show or a book or hear a song? And so one of the things that's neat about what Jung does is he says that quite a few times, but he's also very good at, or he has very good recall in the first place, and he has very good ways of describing and placing that recall in a way that maybe some of those images in his later years were in fact derived from something that he saw and unconsciously, adapted. But a lot of it, he is very clear and believable about the way in which they are, they're, original, in the sense that he wasn't, kind of polluted by some other image. Those were naturally occurring images.
So, interesting little segue here. You talk about like the shared experience, collective unconscious, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, I'm going to do something disruptive. Give me a sec. There we go. So,
your microphone has a mute button.
I'm sure it does, but it's okay.
Okay. When I was in a school band, I remember the band teacher telling us that if you make a mistake, don't point it out, nobody will notice, and you just keep playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
hold on, I have to cough. I'm going to mute my microphone first.
Okay.
Okay, I'm done coughing.
Podcasting 101, folks. Okay. Carl Sagan. Same first name as Carl Jung.
Oh, look at that.
Carl Sagan had a very clever way of explaining multiple dimensions to the layperson.
Mm-hmm.
And the classic example that he uses is flatland, right? Mm-hmm. If you lived in a sheet of paper and you were two-dimensional, right? And a three-dimensional ball were to intersect the plane of the piece of paper.
Mm-hmm. I remember it as a pen, but carry on.
What would you as the flatlander see?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're living in that sheet of paper and you're looking along that plane, you would first see a dot appear out of nowhere, which is the base of the sphere entering the paper. And then that dot would grow into a line segment. You wouldn't actually see a circle, because the only way that you can see a circle is if you're orthogonal to the plane. So you wouldn't actually be in the line of the paper. But you'd see a line segment that
Plain
would grow.
people have never seen a circle.
Huh?
Plain people have never seen a circle.
Right. So the line would grow to a line segment whose final length is the diameter of the sphere. Then the line segment would then shrink all of a sudden, then turn back into a dot and then disappear. And you would have no idea as a flatlander that what you just saw on a higher dimension was actually a sphere intersecting your reality. All right, what does this have to do with shared consciousness?
Can't wait.
So I had a thought about what kinds of beings we are, how we're connected in ways that we may not fully understand.
Mm-hmm.
So using the flatlander example, let's imagine for a minute that instead of a ball intersecting the paper, you have a hand, and the fingers of the hand are going into that plane of the piece of paper, and they're independently wiggling about.
Mm-hmm.
So you as the flatlander, what would you see? You'd see a series of these line segments.
Yeah, dots and lines moving about in weird ways.
Right, in ways that appear to be independent of each other. Each line segment is doing its own thing, right? Not related to the other line segments. However, at a higher dimension, all of those line segments are actually fingers that belong to the same hand.
Mm-hmm.
So even though in that two-dimensional world they are living out their own independent lives, they are connected in a higher dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And a romantic thought that I've had is, could that be us? Could we, as four-dimensional beings, because we're not really three-dimensional, we're four-dimensional.
Prisoners of the fourth, but nevertheless.
Right, we exist in time. Could we actually be connected at a higher dimension where we're all part of the same, I don't know, fucking meta-organism, whatever it might be?
Mm-hmm. Such that, so you're suggesting that in the analogy that our collective consciousness is in fact
a connection to that
higher thing. Whatever that thing is operating in its view perfectly normally. And for us, it's dancing lines and we have no idea what the hell's going on, but we see some similarity, we see some patterns. We're smart enough to discern patterns that go, wait a minute, you too?
Yeah.
All right. I mean, that's a nice idea.
No.
Also, nobody does.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But
no, it's a nice idea. I mean, I think, look, I actively do not care or believe in a form of supernatural explanation. I believe that the natural world is sufficiently extraordinary. But the concept of another dimension is something that is perfectly valid in the natural world because we already have 4 of them and we are pretty sure there's more than 4. Quite possibly 20, who the fuck knows? And so, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't we be in the same position as the plains people, looking at lines dancing around, but for us is a perfectly reasonable thing that's happening? Yeah, I like it.
So, next.
Well, thanks for joining us on. No, I'm kidding. That is by the way how you do end programs. Just saying. So hopefully we get another opportunity.
You find a spot and you
find a fucking spot.
Put your dick down and say, "That's it. We're fucking done." Yep. All right, I got you. All right. So yeah, the where he recalls in his young years the dream about the phallus that he found, the man eater.
Mm-hmm. What?
It's fucked up.
Yeah.
It's fucked up. It's weird, man. It's fun. I can't remember having such. I've certainly had dreams that have impacted me and have had an emotional impact on me, but they were never that abstract.
Okay.
Admittedly, they really weren't that abstract. They were, it was never like a disembodied penis sitting on a throne that was going to eat me.
Yeah. I mean, also, you got to remember, too, that at the time, I forget exactly what year this was now. This was like 1870, 1880, something like that, right?
Yeah.
The imagery of the day was different. The place where he comes from was different. His experience in childhood was different. So the imagery itself is less important than what the imagery means to the individual and how it relates. Right. Yeah.
But also, I guess the meaning of that, which is the I don't know, this the shadow world, as he puts it, right? There's the light, and then there's this darker sort of shadow thing. I don't know. I guess I cannot recall any personal experience where I can relate to that, to the discovery of a shadow world within myself. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. If it does, I'm not aware of it in the same way. I certainly am aware of things I don't like about myself.
So this is one of Carl Jung's images. This is a very hard book to hold up and share because it's a hardcover, very heavy, large book. Okay, but this is one of his images through his meditation. And so the top represents, sort of a good heaven, otherworldly plane. The bottom represents the shadow world, the darkness, the evil, the strange. And the middle represents the self. And this is stuff that he repeated in his drawings over and over again in different ways as he went through all of these meditations. So I have had dreams like that, which I have not necessarily attributed in the same way that he has, but dreams that were not quite so abstract necessarily, or maybe they were and I didn't recognize them, but the ones that were like pretty obvious, where I was in a house and there were multiple floors below me in that house, and the further down, the lower the level, right? So basement 1, basement 2, basement 3, basement 4. The lower the level in that house, the more danger there was, just as a thing. And it was only me in the dream who could recognize that if you went down below the main level, you were going to have a problem. But it was really tempting and interesting. And so the people that I was with on the main level started little by little slipping and finding themselves going, hey, I want to go down there and see what that's all about. But I knew in the dream that this was a mistake, that yes, it looks interesting, but if you go there, it's terribly dangerous and somebody has to try to pull you out. And the hard part about that is that the further down that individual goes, then the individual who's got to pull them out also has to go into this other world of danger and strange, but somehow has to manage to not be subject to the will of the lower levels. You have to remain somehow conscious enough to be able to dive down into the absolute depths of terror and fear and extract things from it of value without being subject to its will. So, I mean, that's me interpreting the dream, but effectively it was like, oh no, somebody's going downstairs. Crap, I have to go down there. Oh, this is terrifying. I have to remain conscious. So like, yeah.
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
I consider myself to be a gamer. I've played video games since I was 6 years old. It reminds me of dungeon crawlers, Diablo 2. It reminds me, like, that's literally the essence of a whole genre of video games. There's your avatar, your character, starts off on ground level in a town, right? Enters a building, and then it is a literal slow descent into hell as they go floor by floor down a dungeon, and each time they go further down, it gets darker and darker and more challenging. But the rewards, the loot, the weapons, the armor, all that stuff is more tantalizing because there's more cool shit down there.
There's more cool shit down there, right? So I guess and you'll get through this further as you read more of this particular book, is that the thing that Jung does actively is he seeks out those lower levels, among others, but those lower levels to some degree. And his capability to seek out those lower levels while remaining conscious is, I think, one of his extraordinary accomplishments. His ability to put himself in a state of meditation and dream recollection such that he is able to explore his own demons in a way that is lucid and beneficial, and then to understand even what to do with that. Because you can go explore your own demons and come out all fucked up, like way worse than when you went in, right? Depending upon what you're trying to do. But his ability to do that consciously, to explore the unconscious consciously and do something of value with it in a way that's relatable is pretty neat. Now, look, the art form, whether it's, paintings, movies, pictures, books, video games, whatever, that explore those same themes are perfectly valid in the way that they explore those themes. But none of them, as far as I've ever experienced, try to do anything to understand them. They simply go, "Hey, this is a thing I thought of. Isn't this crazy?" And
right.
We'll throw some tentacles out there and see if it sticks. But
I'm gonna. Yeah. This is an ignorant statement. I do not know his work.
Dear.
Right?
Am I going to have to edit out this statement? Is it going to be that ignorant?
No.
Oh, okay.
Like, how the symbolic abstractions of the worst elements of a person's nature are not the point. The point is identifying the worst elements of your nature. That's what you're trying to reckon with.
Yes.
The abstractions are a symptom. The abstractions are a symptom of that.
If it's a dragon or a
right,
fucking
exactly.
basement, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's not what's relevant. What matters is what the dragon actually literally means for you in terms of how you think about the world, how you think about yourself, how you think about other people, all that kind of shit.
But what's interesting about all of this is that, so a dragon is not a basement, but it's kind of the same. Nobody thinks about and explores those elements on a cloud on a sunny day, floating through the sky with pretty music playing. It's an interesting thing, right? Like, the symbol itself doesn't matter, but the fact that all of the symbols we've ever come up with are all roughly the same kind of thing. There's red and black, and it's creepy, and it's small, and it's...
Sure, I mean, that's interesting, and it could certainly speak to some biological, genetically imprinted thing that we have in all of us, but that's not as useful to know. Its universality is not as useful as decoding what the dragon means.
I think for the individual,
as a person.
For the individual, yes, but this concept of universality is still interesting.
Sure.
Because what it means is that it's not any one person coming up with nonsense things. It's all of us collectively
it's
are
legit.
doing the same thing.
It's real. It's repeatable. It's legitimate.
Yeah.
But my engineering brain is always geared towards like, okay, solve the problem.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. So the problem isn't the dragon. The problem is
what the dragon
means for you, which is you're resentful or self-destructive or you have issues with trust, whatever it might be, right?
Sure.
And to that end, when you dig down to the bottom, how many different permutations of crap really exist? It's just a handful of stuff. It's the same. It's like a color palette, right? You've got red, yellow, and blue. Yeah, you can make all kinds of colors out of that. But at the end of the day, when you get down to the very bottom, there's 3 fucking colors, and that's it. Mix and match them however you want. Create all different kinds of shades of brown, black, and tar, and all that kind of shit. But in the beginning, there's red, yellow, and blue. So when you get down to the bottom of a person's shitty parts of themselves, right? How many, you're either fearful, you're resentful, or you're, like, you know what, like, I can't think of all of them, but it can't be more than a handful of things that all of us, to varying degrees in different mixed and matched ways, we feel from this small palette of, say, 5, maybe 10 tops things that we have, right? So it's almost like
it's easy. Know. Like, come on, what do you do? What's taking you so long?
Well, here's the thing. The easy part to me is the identifying of the shit, not the fixing. I never would ever suggest in any world that the fixing of any of it is easy. But the peeling back just take the express elevator to the bottom floor, dude. Like,
that's it. But so that's generally incorrect. So, okay, let's just say, for instance, there are 10 things, right? And if you just go to the bottom floor, there are 10 things down there. That's it. Like, we're that simple. And for quite frankly, psychologists for the better part of 150 years and more, philosophers before them and religious leaders before them have been trying to figure out what those things are and how to categorize them. And we've done an all right job, give or take, right? Because this is a kind of a universal question: is what's going on inside of our brains on the quiet side, where the outside world is happening around us, but yet there's a whole other world happening on the inside. Mm-hmm. So let's just say there are 10 of those things. I would suggest that the hardest part of any of it is going to the bottom floor and being able to come up back to the main floor and still be a functioning human. Because the bottom floor, quite literally, wherever the hell that is, because it's probably different for individuals and different culturally and to whatever degree, however many stories down you have to go, it requires an individual to do probably one of the hardest things that any individual can do, and that is face fear directly and experience that fear fully without neglecting the reality of why that fear is happening. Because it's really easy to just kind of be in a fearful situation and close yourself off and get through it and never really understand what it was that scared you so much. Just know that you were scared and you moved on, you got out of it, and now you don't have to think about it anymore. But the basement, the dungeon, the dragons, the whatever, the darkness, etc. There are a lot of little corners and there's a lot of little things, and it depends on the human. And I would suggest that the hardest part about that is being okay with hanging out in the darkest corner of your brain. I mean, and not being a serial killer or being or being a fucking rapist. You know, you gotta
But recognizing the dark corners doesn't mean that they consume. Visiting the basement floor is not the same as living there. And you don't need to live there to clean it up. You don't need to live in the basement to clean the basement.
I think that there's another way to look at it, is that you're not cleaning the basement. You're turning the lights on.
Okay.
And all you're doing is assimilating the things that are the darkest to the rest of your conscious personality.
Why is that so? I can understand that it would be unpleasant, off-putting. No one likes it. But you're going a step further. You're claiming that it can induce a kind of insanity. You're saying that if people turn the lights on in their basement and stare for a minute at all the scary things about themselves that they really don't fucking like, all the horrible, how does Colonel Jessup put it? The things you don't talk about at parties, right? Looking at those things inside yourself, okay, you see them. Mm-hmm. Why would they drive you mad?
For some people, those types of things are sufficiently difficult, terrifying, and dark. And let me back that up a little bit. The difficult part about that for some people is that those horribly terrifying things are them. And the admitting that you as an individual who thinks, hey, I'm just a nice guy who goes around the world and does things, to admit to yourself that a major component of your personality is goddamn fucking terrible. Inside your mind, deep in the recess, the thing you never say out loud, the weird thought you have that you don't know where it came from and why it came that way, that is you. It's not some external thing that's waiting for you to come kick its ass. It is literally you. It's like that clip you showed me of that movie. That guy holding the gun to his figurative gun to his figurative head in the elevator. Yeah. That was him doing that in that scene. Right. And there are some people in the world throughout history who are unable to tell the difference between themselves. And if you spend enough time, or rather, if you spend any time exploring that element of yourself, it can drive you to psychosis. It can. I'm not saying that it will. I'm not saying that it has me, or that it will you, or that it does for everybody. No, certainly not. But the thing that is that exploration is a very complicated thing to do. To go down into that space and to be okay with it. It's kind of like I say this all the time, sort of jokingly, but it's actually rather true. For a lot of years, I struggled with the fact that I am straight up a manipulative human being. I unconsciously go around the world trying to get people to do shit that I want them to do. Like, without even thinking about it.
How unconscious is it?
Nowadays, it's not very unconscious. But back in the day, oh man, I was like, I was trying to direct the universe to bend to my will in whatever fashion I could come up with. But if you had asked me, hey, Mark, are you like trying to manipulate me? I would be like, of course not. I'm just being genuine, Mark. I don't know what you're talking about. And I meant that legitimately. Over the years, I have recognized this attribute of my personality and have realized that it's not best served to just try to manipulate people. Like, it's not great to always try to bend the world to my will, because half the time, if not more, it doesn't work. It's kind of fucking stupid, but it's a useful trait in certain instances. And so to be conscious of that thing, and this is not the same as like facing your demons necessarily, although it is similar, is being conscious of that negative trait of mine has allowed me to assimilate it in a way that makes me more able to use it for the powers of good versus just being a fucking raging asshole all the time.
Okay. Now,
as an example.
Okay. And as using that same example, right? We're talking about the basement.
Mm-hmm.
You turned the lights on,
mm-hmm.
and you saw an element of your personality that was terrible.
Mm.
This desire to manipulate, or at least you saw that this desire could be levied toward terrible ends.
It was an innate desire that seemed to operate to all control. On its own.
You wanted to control, right? For whatever reason, power. Master. Sure. Yeah. Is it? I don't know. I don't. You made a choice. You literally said you made a choice to use it for good. Why?
Well, no.
Why didn't you just let it fucking consume you and become a manipulative psychopath?
Well, because it was shitty. I saw consequences.
Shitty by whose definition?
By my definition. By my definition
who are
in
you?
the world.
Are you the shitty parts of yourself, or are you the good parts of yourself? You made a choice. You chose to align your identity with the part of you.
It's not so simplistic, because what I was saying there is I saw a consequence in the real world in how I interacted with other people and how they interacted with me, and the consequences of those interactions, and the objective viewpoint, the viewpoint that exists in reality that everybody can see, is that if you behave in that manner with too many people for too long, then ultimately you end up with bad relationships. And bad relationships are not helpful to yourself.
Maybe you're just not as good a manipulator as you think you are.
Well, no, I mean, so
maybe there are people out there who are just better at it. Their consequences
are few.
The input that they get back, that they receive back from that is better input.
There is every reason to believe that I am smack in the middle average on everything that I do. Maybe that's it. Maybe you're right. And you're quite right. There's probably out there manipulators that are so fantastic that they don't need to do a thing. They can walk around manipulating tigers, fucking wild animals, in just doing shit in the world because food there, water there, sex there, and that's it.
Trump.
But
fuck.
I mean,
we're not gonna get political. No, let's not do that.
Well, but like
not for this episode.
No, let's leave that. We'll leave that for another one. But yeah, it's the idea that the consequences of my behavior were insufficiently good by my own judgment based upon the external interactions that I had, and I was sufficiently able to tailor my behavior in a way that, I'm still kind of a manipulative prick, but I'm not actively unconscious about it. I am now conscious about it in a way that allows me to use it to further my sales goals without injuring people.
What you're proposing for yourself is that you use the utilitarian analysis. You
in this instance, yeah.
You didn't stop manipulating because of some moral absolutism that says that that's bad. You did it because the feedback that you got from it wasn't working for you.
No, I mean, we can, and this is very much another program in that regard, but some moral absolutism, whether it exists or not, I'm not terribly aware of. My understanding of the way that the entire thing works here is whether or not shit is working for people. In whatever capacity it's working or not. If you're hungry, you should have food. If you're not getting food, shit isn't working. Whatever that shit is, food need, food not have, thing not work. Try something else. So whatever it is that we want to label as absolute morality, in my view, is ultimately a functional, utilitarian system that allows us to all be as good as we are able to be in that moment. And good meaning functional. Hungry people, gonna do bad shit. Hungry people, gonna be angry. Angry people, gonna do stupid. Right? So fulfill some of the basic requirements in concert with your neighbors, with the people around you, such that you are all not suffering the consequence of bad utility. Do good utility. And with that, I think is a very good place to end the program. The very first episode of the End Ayoub podcast. I don't think I have anything more to say. Do you? Well, that's not true. No, you have so much more to say.
I was just going to say this has been a really fun experiment. I'm looking forward to the next one.